Thank you very much for joining our SDGs Promise Japan SPJ's special online seminar for TICAD8 titled Considering Global Health After the COVID-19 Pandemic. I am Rieko Suzuki, Chair of SPJ. SPJ is a non-profit organization, and our main activities have been to eliminate poverty in the world, especially in African continent. Today, we are excited to invite Professor Peter J Hotez and Professor Kayo Takuma. Thank you, Professor Hotez and Professor Takuma, for joining us today. We are extremely pleased to have both of you back for our online seminar. Professor Hotez is a world authority on vaccine development and neglected tropical diseases, shortly NTDs, which has been one of the most critical issues in the African countries. He is the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. Notably, I am very pleased to inform that Professor Hotez and his colleague, Dr. Maria Elena Bottesi, have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize this year for their excellent work to develop and distribute a low-cost COVID-19 vaccines without patent limitation. He has also been a leading figure in the fight against the anti-vaccine and anti-science movement. Professor Takuma is a professor of international politics at the Faculty of Law and Politics at Tokyo Metropolitan University. Her research includes global health governance, its origin and evolution, and challenges, with a focus on its relationship with the changing international political order. She translated Professor Hotez's latest book, titled Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in a Time of Anti-Science. During this seminar, Professor Hotez will share his views. How should we face the fight against the diverse infectious diseases during the first half of the session? Then he will discuss with Professor Takuma actions we must take for the future. We look forward to learning from both of your superior insights today. Now, Professor Hotez, please may we start with your lecture?
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and it's an honor to be here with you. I wish I could be in Japan. Usually I would come to Japan maybe once a year, once every 2 years, and I love the country, and I miss Tokyo and Kyoto and many other places, but it's at least we can continue the dialogue virtually for now. I will share my slides, and I'll talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then happy to have a discussion with Professor Takuma, and it's very nice to see you again, Professor, and thank you again for the translation of the book. I'll talk about the book, but also some important updates on what's happened. The book, which came out last year, what it does is it tries to create an interdisciplinary dialogue between the biomedical sciences and the political sciences, because we've learned how the two are closely interrelated. And one of the findings of the book is that the big drivers of diseases, like whether it's COVID or monkeypox or polio, is that it's social determinants together with climate change. It's poverty and war and political instability and urbanization and deforestation, rising anti-science together with climate change. And one point of the book is that, in the biomedical sciences, at medical universities, at medical schools, we really do not teach these kinds of things. We don't teach about poverty and war and political instability and urbanization. And yet these are become the new drivers of disease and why we're seeing so much happening at once. People often say, well, why is it that all of a sudden we had COVID and now we have monkeypox and now we have Marburg virus and now we have polio? Well, it's this confluence of forces. And in the book, I find that it really began around 7-8 years ago when we started to see this confluence where political instability combines with climate change, urbanization, deforestation, and anti-science. And now it's global, but it started out in certain, what I call it, hotspot areas of the world, such as, for instance, the Arabian Peninsula, where the wars from the ISIS occupation in Yemen collapsed vaccine programs, mosquito and sandfly vector control programs to bring back leishmaniasis. And then you also had unprecedented high temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius or more, which were drying up ancient agricultural lands along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers and bringing people into cities. And the point is, it's not climate change alone, but climate change acting in concert with urbanization and deforestation, or what Jeffrey Gettleman of the New York Times calls Africa's unwars, meaning that it's not wars between armies, but armed banditry on citizen populations in northern Nigeria from the Boko Haram. And then this is collapsing infrastructure as well. Or in Central Latin America and Venezuela, where you had both a 40-year drought together with the Maduro regime and the socioeconomic collapse. So people stopped vaccinating against measles. They stopped doing vector control. And then as people were leaving the country into Brazil and into Colombia, they brought disease with them and decimating ancient indigenous people. Or even on Texas and the Gulf Coast, where this rise in anti-science aggression, together with very aggressive urbanization and population explosion. So these are what are the real drivers of bringing back disease. And now for COVID-19, of course, we've had up to, the official numbers are 5 to 6 million deaths, but some people say as many as 20 million deaths, maybe 5 to 6 million deaths in India alone. And in the US was probably the second or third most affected country after India and maybe Russia. And by now people are familiar with this pattern of deaths, the original wave of COVID deaths in New York and then in Texas and the southern United States, and then the big wave that came in January of 2021, and then the Delta wave and the Omicron wave. But I have here this blue arrow. And what that blue arrow signifies is the date May 1st, 2021. And that's the date when the Biden administration said that any American who wants to get vaccinated could get vaccinated. But yet so many Americans refused to get vaccinated. And we actually lost 200,000 Americans died needlessly because they refused to get a vaccine. And I do not even call this misinformation or disinformation anymore. I call it anti-science aggression. And this is a new dominant force that I know you're already dealing with in Japan and elsewhere in Asia. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. In the meantime, what I do is I'm a vaccine scientist and head a Center for Vaccine Development with my science partner, Dr. Batazzi. And the Texas Medical Center is the world's largest medical center. It's a medical city of 100,000 employees and 4 medical schools and 60 institutions. We do everything in a big way in Texas. And one of the things that we did was set up the center to make vaccines for poverty-related diseases. The vaccines that the big pharma companies are not in a position to make, vaccines for schistosomiasis and hookworm and Chagas disease and leishmaniasis. And then about 10 years ago, we started developing coronavirus vaccines for SARS and MERS, and then when the COVID-19 sequence hit for COVID-19 as well. And we call these vaccines anti-poverty vaccines because they're vaccines that not only for diseases that affect health, but because these parasitic infections, such as schistosomiasis and hookworm and Chagas disease, they also are debilitating and they make people too sick to go to work, or they interfere with economic productivity or women's reproductive health. And I've been writing about these diseases, which I call forgotten people, forgotten diseases. And this book also has been translated into Japanese, I believe, by the University of Tokyo Press. And so these vaccines not only have the potential to help improve health, but also lift people out of poverty. So I think we need to think about vaccines for also their social implications. And again, this is why I'm very pleased that Professor Takuma joins us, because we really do need this interdisciplinary dialogue. For the neglected tropical diseases, these are enumerations from the Institute for Health Metrics. These are among the most common afflictions of people who live in poverty. The numbers are extraordinary. Half a billion people almost have intestinal roundworm or whipworm or hookworm or scabies or schistosomiasis and some of the others. And basically what it means is every person who lives in extreme poverty is affected by one or more of these diseases. And the World Bank estimates are about 750 million people below the World Bank poverty line, and basically every one of them is infected with one of these diseases. So we make vaccines for them. So we have a hookworm vaccine, a schistosomiasis vaccine for Africa and Latin America. That this is now in phase 2 clinical trials. We have a Chagas disease vaccine that is now reaching phase 1 trials in Mexico, and trying to decide what the economic model is for these is also very important, because these are vaccines that so far the multinational pharma companies have not been very interested in, and yet they can make a huge impact on improving global health. So they're economically dominant, meaning cost savings, and yet it's very hard to persuade countries to accept the investment to make them. One of the things that we do for our vaccines is, yes, we do a lot of innovation, but at the same time, we also have decided that if we're really going to make vaccines for people who live in poverty, it's very important to be compatible with the vaccine production capabilities. So I'm showing you here a map of the group that calls themselves the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network. Some of them are private, some of them are government, others nonprofit, and they exist throughout the Asian region, but also in Africa and Latin America. And what's interesting is the most commonly used technology that they have is to make their own recombinant hepatitis B vaccine. So countries such as Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Argentina, Brazil, Cuba all make their own recombinant hepatitis B vaccine, which is done through microbial fermentation in yeast. It's a process that's been around for 30 years. It's a vegan process, no animal cells or human cells. So we decided if we're going to make vaccines, we're going to use this technology because you can plug it immediately into their system in order to produce these vaccines locally. So we did this to address the terrible global inequalities for COVID-19. This is a map of the world, the unvaccinated world on the African continent and South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central America. And the point is, this is what not only is this caused a humanitarian crisis, but also it said that all of the new variants that arose, like Delta and Omicron, arose out of unvaccinated populations in this country. And so we need to vaccinate the world if we're ultimately going to stop the pandemic. And what we did was we developed a vaccine, a recombinant protein vaccine using this technology, and we sent it to We provided it with no patent, and we provided the license to India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Botswana. And India got the furthest along. There's a company there called Biological E, which took our technology and scaled up production of the vaccine, which is known as Corbevax. And now this has been given to 66 million doses have been given of the vaccine. So it's proof of concept that you do not have to be a multinational pharma company to start vaccinating the world. We did this through an academic partnership at Texas Children's Hospital in Baylor, together with this Indian vaccine producer and the Indian government. The vaccine is the receptor binding domain of the SARS-2 spike protein on aluminum hydroxide together with the CpG oligonucleotide. And we showed it was highly effective in non-human primates, induced high levels of virus-neutralizing antibody. It was also the lowest cost vaccine. It was 145 rupees, which is about $1.90 a dose, less than $2. And now it's been released for emergency use listing, and the same is planned for Indonesia and Bangladesh and elsewhere. And we do a lot of the early engineering in our lab. So we're a hybrid between an academic lab and a biotech. And we do things like rearrange the molecules so we can express it without an N-terminal asparagine, which is heavily glycosylated and interferes with immunogenicity, or by modifying a cysteine to an asparagine to prevent intermolecular disulfide bond formation. And then we do the scale-up process development in our labs, which again is a hybrid of academic and biotech. And then in collaboration with the Emory University Non-Human Primate Center, we were able to show that upon challenge, you get very little virus in the lungs, bronchoalveolar lavage fluid. One or two of the non-human primates had breakthrough in the nose or mouth, but that was true of mRNA vaccines, and the lungs looked almost perfect. So we knew it was a great vaccine upon virus challenge. And then by 2020, we were getting desperate phone calls from the ministers of health and ministers of science from low and middle income countries across Asia and Africa. And we provided not only the license, but also we provided the production cell bank. We actually put every step in the process in the public domain so anybody could reproduce it. But to make it easier, we would provide the production cell bank and the technical know-how for the scale up. So when we transferred the technology to BioE, they showed the levels of virus neutralizing antibody were about as high as the mRNA vaccines and better than the adenovirus or whole inactivated virus vaccines. And in a superiority study, they showed it was superior to the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine in terms of virus neutralizing antibodies and in terms of cellular immune responses as well. These are the cellular responses to Corbevax, our vaccine, compared to the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is known as Covishield and also produced in India. And then it was released for emergency use authorization last year. And then children have been getting it now for several months. And as I say, 66 million doses have been delivered. It's just been approved now for the 5 to 11-year-olds. And it's been approved now as a booster for adults. And then we're now trying to reproduce this on the African continent. The president of Botswana has built a production facility on the edge of the Kalahari Desert, and they're scaling up production, and they're hoping to begin producing this as well to provide innovation for Africa. So we do a lot of capacity building and training in addition. Now, the other piece that I haven't talked about from the book is this rise in anti-science aggression. And I think this is a very important force. And I got involved in this in a very interesting way because I have 4 adult children, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And the first assertion from the anti-vaccine group was to claim that vaccines cause autism. And I stood out there and said, no, it's not related to autism at all. And so I became a major target for the anti-vaccine lobby. And that was hard, but it was also useful because it taught me what the disinformation empire looks like. And I'd like to end my comments, my formal remarks tonight or this morning for your time, is to tell you how I think the anti-vaccine empire has evolved or devolved over the last 20 years. So it started, and I can take you through version 1.0, version 2.0, and version 3.0. Version 1.0 claimed that vaccines cause autism. And that was refuted, and I'll explain how in a minute. And then about 7-8 years ago in the United States, the anti-vaccine movement became a political movement around this concept of health freedom and medical freedom. And now it's globalized to become an empire, and it's become a very deadly force as a consequence. So let me take you through how I think the anti-vaccine empire has evolved from 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and then I'll stop and I'll be happy to take questions. So first, 1.0. Even within 1.0, it's quite complicated because the original assertion claimed that the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, replicated in the colon of kids and caused autism. And the scientific community responded to that in a big way, showing that kids who got the MMR vaccine were no more likely to acquire autism than kids who didn't. And some of that work was done in Japan. But by then, the anti-vaccine groups started getting money and power and political clout, and they switched it up. And that's what I call by moving the goalpost. As soon as you think you're there, the anti-vaccine groups would move it. Then they said it was thimerosal preservative, and then spacing vaccines too close together, or alum in vaccines. And each time the scientific community would respond. Then they even pivoted away from autism. They claimed it was the HPV vaccine, papillomavirus vaccine, was causing infertility or autoimmunity. And I know you've been dealing this with in Japan. And of course, none of it is true. And the other false assertion has been now copy-pasted onto COVID-19 vaccine. So the fake assertion around HPV vaccine has now been copy-pasted, they say, for COVID-19 vaccines causing infertility, and none of it is true. And the way I got involved in this is because my youngest daughter is now an adult. Rachel has autism and intellectual disabilities, and I wrote the book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, which goes into the science of it all, and also goes into what the science of autism is and how it begins in early fetal brain development, well before kids ever see vaccines, and through the action of autism genes. And we even did whole exome genomic sequencing on Rachel and my wife and I to identify the unique autism gene that has some similarities to the others. And this is when the aggression really started against me. But we had some effect. I think we were able to diffuse the false assertion that vaccines cause autism. But then it took a pivot, a change in a way I would not have anticipated. And this started around 2000, in the 2010s, 2013s, where so many kids were not getting vaccinated in California that predictably a large measles epidemic ensued. And the California legislature then insisted that for children to go to school, they had to be vaccinated. And this ignited, though, a counter movement around this concept of health freedom, medical freedom. It was really propaganda, but basically the anti-vaccine groups now switched around from autism to say, well, you cannot interfere with our health freedom. And it became a political movement linked to the far right. In Texas, it became linked to the Republican Tea Party. And even our own political action committee, a PAC called Texans for Vaccine Choice. And so you had over 70,000 kids who no longer had access to vaccinations, and especially in the suburbs of Austin and in North Texas. And this created a public health crisis as a result. And that's what we're dealing with right now in the United States, because in this time of COVID, the refusal to vaccinate expanded from Texas to the other red states, meaning the conservative states, the Republican states. And this is the new analysis from Charles Gaba, who's a health analyst, but also the New York Times and Axios, the Kaiser Family Foundation have all found the same thing, that after May 1, those who are losing their lives from COVID are those who are not getting vaccinated. Overwhelmingly, they live in red states, conservative Republican states like Texas. And the redder the state, as measured by Trump voters in the 2020 election, the greater the loss of life. And this has become very difficult to discuss. And I would appreciate hearing Professor Takuma's remarks because, as scientists, all of our training says we're supposed to be politically neutral and not talk about Republicans or Democrats or liberals or conservatives. But what do you do when the people dying are all coming from one side? It's the anti-vaccine movement has become purely a political movement around the far right. And now you even have far-right extremists like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers marching at anti-vaccine rallies. This is a political movement, and it's globalizing. It's extending up into Canada and Western Europe, and the New York Times has written about how it's linked to QAnon and even neo-Nazi groups. And so the question is, this is a globalized movement, and it's not just an academic discussion because of the loss of life. It's 200,000 people in red states unvaccinated because of political allegiance. And now I believe this is going global. I think the US-style anti-vaccine movement is extending now to Africa. The rhetoric that's being used, Fox News, is all going to the African continent and elsewhere. And I believe, when we think about the big social movements like political terrorism or nuclear proliferation or cyber attacks, this anti-science, anti-vaccine movement is killing more people than all of those things. And yet we don't frame it in that way. And so I have a new book that I'm writing with the working title Anti-Science Kills that will also be published by Johns Hopkins University Press. And it's very much like a political science book. Even though I'm not a political science, I'm trying to learn from people like Professor Takuma on the language of political science, because that's what this is. So let me stop there, and so we can leave plenty of time for questions and discussions, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your lecture, a very insightful and amazing remarks. I believe that Doctor's remarks would enhance the audience's understanding of the book, as well as current global health situations and emerging challenges. And thank you also for sharing the story of developing your vaccine. I was highly impressed by the news that your team succeeded in developing Corbevax, a low-cost and patent-free COVID-19 vaccine, which is expected to, prove itself as a better weapon against the COVID-19 by catering to the unvaccinated in the poorer countries. Since its publication in January, the Japanese edition of the Preventing the Next Pandemic has been led by a wide range of Japanese peoples, from government officials and the media to the students and ordinary people. We have, however, observed several changes since its publication on topics like Russia's invasion of Ukraine or the emergence of monkeypox. So I hope to ask doctors' viewpoints on how to deal with the current and the future health challenges that have been brought about by such changing international environment. And before we start our conversation, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to this invaluable opportunity. And also, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to everyone who have planned and organized this dialogue.
I think there's two things. With regards to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is creating a new set of problems, especially around global malnutrition. And one of the things that I'm quite worried about is, now that grain exports are being blocked from leaving Odessa to East Africa, and you also have the climate change going on in East Africa and these hot, dry climates and drought. And so the projections are for incredible levels of malnutrition and mass starvation events. So what do you do from a disease perspective? Well, I have a paper under review, an article that says maybe we should, make vaccines for diseases that contribute to malnutrition, such as diarrheal disease pathogens. Also, these worm infections can contribute to it to help in this malnutrition crisis. So I think that's a big problem. Monkeypox, I'm quite concerned that the trajectory is so aggressive that the rise in cases is becoming quite extensive. And my worry is that monkeypox will, before it was confined to Central and West Africa, my worry is that in time, this will become widespread in Europe, and we're already seeing it now, 4,000 cases in the US and going up every day. But also in Europe, the greatest number of cases are in Brazil and in Spain. And therefore, we should expect that because there's a lot of trade and education and commerce exchanges between Brazil and Portugal and Spain that we're going to in Latin America, we're going to see monkeypox widespread in a country like Brazil. So I think we have to aggressively accelerate the number of vaccine doses. And once again, the United States is doing vaccine hoarding. So all the doses are going to the US and nothing's going to Africa. So it's almost as if we did not learn the mistakes that we made with COVID-19 and we're repeating them for monkeypox.
Thank you. May I ask about the geopolitical impact on the vaccine diplomacy? That since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the political division of international society has so intensified that we have observed its impact even in the field of global health. For example, at the WHO Assembly held in this May, a resolution condemning Russia's invasion was adopted. And the WHO's European office, to which both Russia and Ukraine affiliate, also asked the Director General of the WHO to relocate the WHO's office in Moscow to other place. So, and that there is also a huge gap between Russia and other countries on the proposed pandemic treaty. And you mentioned the possibility of vaccine diplomacy between the US and Russia in chapter 10 of your book. And I agree with your idea, but unfortunately, the present situation is far from favorable to make this happen. So, yeah.
Yes, I agree. So, and it's very unfortunate because some of our greatest successes in science diplomacy were between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, before the breakup of the Soviet Union. So it was U.S.-USSR collaboration that led to the oral polio vaccine development and smallpox eradication. But now we've gone the opposite way. Now we have what's called vaccine nationalism. And is it possible to get it re-implemented? Maybe one day. I think with President Putin, it's not going to be possible, but I think we have to still try. I mean, the U.S. and the USSR worked together at the worst time in the Cold War, right after the Sputnik launch, where they could have threatened nuclear annihilation, and yet they worked together for the polio vaccine. So I would still love to see something like that happen. It's very difficult now in the current geopolitical environment, but I think we still have to try. And that's one of one of the edgier, more interesting aspects of vaccine diplomacy is to work with countries that we do not have good international relations or foreign relations as a means to promote foreign relations. So if that's really true, then maybe we need to look at vaccine diplomacy with North Korea or Iran or Russia. I understand the challenges of it. I understand the complexities, but it still may have merit if we can get that kind of level of cooperation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a quite pity that we failed to bring about international cooperation, unlike during the Cold War period. As you mentioned, that the cooperation between the US and the Soviet resulted in many contributions in the field of global health, such as the development of polio vaccine or eradication of smallpox. Yeah, so it's such a pity. In my opinion, the health issues, especially those in terms of providing or developing vaccines, have become more political and sensitive issues as part of health security, which partly explains why it is quite difficult for nations that are in opposition to cooperate with each other. Yeah, and this is also true for US and China, as we discussed in the last November. Yeah, I also hope the situation would improve in the future.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
another example of the importance of bringing China in, we still do not understand the origins of COVID. I do not believe it was gain of function research or a lab leak. I believe it was natural origins, but we still do not know that in detail. We know bats are involved, and we know perhaps livestock or other exotic animals, but we've never really done an international outbreak investigation in central China to understand the origins. And the consequence of that is, we've already had SARS in 2002. That was the first coronavirus, and then MERS in 2012, now COVID-19. If we fail to understand the origins, we're going to have COVID-26 or COVID-32. And we still do not have that kind of international cooperation yet.
Yeah, it's very pity. It's such a pity. My next question is about the role of non-state actors, such as institutions, charitable foundations, or civil society organizations. As I said, that I was highly impressed by the news that your team at Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development developed Corbevax, a low-cost patent-free COVID-19 vaccine. Several papers and the books have already pointed out that the changes in the global health architecture, in which conventional approach from wealthy countries to poorer countries takes a backseat, while a non-conventional and innovative approach involving the non-state actors or public-private partnership play a bigger role. In this regard, I believe your contribution is a testimony of that the big role of non-state actors in global health arena, and a big step for filling the vaccine access gap amid little development of the IP waiver dispute at the World Trade Organization or the WHO's effort at the mRNA vaccine technology transfer hub. So what are your thoughts on the role of non-state actors, and what do you think is necessary to push their role further?
Yes, this is a very good question. I think part of the answer is we're too focused on the multinational pharma companies. The multinational pharma companies do a lot of important things. For instance, a lot of the vaccines supplied to the Gavi Alliance comes from the big pharma companies. So the problem is not to demonize the big pharma companies. The problem is we've grown too dependent on the multinational pharma companies. We need to, what I say is, broaden the ecosystem to include other actors like academic product development partnerships like our Texas Children's Hospital Center, but also the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network, and really empower them to develop their own vaccines and give them the freedom to do that. So I think the idea is, some people call it decolonizing the ecosystem to make it less dependent on the pharma companies. And I think that's one way. I think the other is, decolonizing the regulatory system, because right now the way it works is you have to have for global distribution, your vaccine has to be approved by the World Health Organization through a pre-qualification mechanism, or you go through one of 6 or 7 stringent regulatory authorities. And the 6 or 7 stringent regulatory authorities are the US, the UK, Canada, Japan, Australia, the European medicine agencies, and all high-income countries in Australia. But what we should do is start bringing in some of the regulatory authorities from India or Brazil to also give them stringent status so they too can approve vaccines for the world. So we're still not fully committed to decolonizing the system. It's still very much the high-income countries in control of the low and middle-income countries. And I think it's not working. It did not work for COVID-19 vaccines, and it's already failing for monkeypox vaccines. And the world is paying the price because it's allowing these pandemics to flourish. And I think we have to come to terms with this.
Yeah, I can't agree more with your idea that the effective ecosystem is necessary. Yeah, I think that the role of various kinds of non-state actors, including the civil society organizations or academia, is increasing in the post-COVID-19 health architecture. And concerning the developing vaccines for neglected diseases, as you mentioned in the chapter 10 of the book, some sustainable business model is crucial. And to make such a business model happen, I think that the social innovation is necessary. And accordingly, the role of social science or social scientists is also crucial. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yes, I agree. And I think we need greater cooperation. You know, the biomedical model, you know, the way I was trained, right? I got an MD and then my PhD in biochemistry for making vaccines. But look at the drivers of disease. It's social inequality, it's political instability, it's urbanization. So we need new types of institutes, for instance, at universities in Japan and the US. I mean, take a university like your university, Tokyo Metropolitan University, University of Tokyo, to build an interdisciplinary institute where the political scientists are sitting next to the biomedical scientists. And part of the problem is the way the academic promotion system works. We're encouraged only to write and speak for each other. So to stay within our discipline, to write the journals within our discipline or the grants within our discipline. And yet, to really solve global problems, we need to be talking with each other more.
Yeah. I'm as a member of academia, you know, as a political scientist. I'm also responsible for the future sustainable health governance, and I hope we can collaborate in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And my next question is about the role of Japan. Japan has published its global health strategy in May of this year, which acknowledged the various health challenges in Anthropocene and determined to deal with the wider range of health issues, including non-communicable diseases and neglected diseases by focusing on the universal health coverage. Japan will host the G7 Hiroshima Summit next year, along with the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD, where Japan is expected to take a lead and launch a concrete strategy in global health arena. What do you expect from Japan in terms of universal health coverage, especially in its relationship with Africa or Asia?
Well, I think the one way to think of this is remember what Japan looked like after World War II. It was, thrown into terrible poverty and malnutrition. And yet the Japanese people, worked hard to make Japan one of the most advanced countries in the world. And a lot of that was through science and technology capacity building. And I think that's, to me, the lesson learned for the African continent as well is, the problem even with the U.S., what we focus on is supplying vaccines, mRNA vaccines made in the West, and then we give them out like candy to the African countries. And it's not the way to go. We need to build that science and technology capacity. So that's what we're trying to do, is build capacity. But of course, we're a small research institute. So I would say, partnership opportunities between the great universities in Japan, which are the best universities in Asia, right? I mean, Kyoto University and the Tokyo universities, and, the list goes on, to work to partner to build that capacity on the African continent. I think it would be very exciting and a great opportunity, I think, for Japan.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. universal health coverage is a comprehensive idea that covers several health topics. So I think it is necessary to focus on specific topics, especially in the time of crisis. And I myself expect Japan develop its own vaccine diplomacy with Asia and Africa. As you mentioned, that Japan shows a great potential in vaccine development, and especially in developing the traditional vaccine technology, such as the protein-based or inactivated vaccines. So I expect Japanese government, pharmaceutical companies, and universities to help Asian or African countries capacity building for vaccine development, as well as Japanese company or foundations involvement in providing financial support. And concerning the Asia, Japan announced to establish the ASEAN Public Health Emergency Center in 2020. And it has not yet been established, but it's expected to serve as a center to establish and strengthen Japan's vaccine diplomacy in Asia. I hope such an effort would be extended to other places, including Africa.
Yes, but of course, the other thing I always point out is, we focus a lot on Africa, but there's tremendous poverty in Asia as well, right? I mean, the Philippines, Cambodia, parts of Laos, Papua New Guinea, of course, and some of the South Pacific islands. So I think there's also, for that ASEAN center, I think this is another aspect of focusing on disease emergence and the poorer countries of Asia. Again, that kind of international science and technology cooperation.
I hope that the center.
And I say the same thing in the United States for Latin America. I mean, I can fly within 3 hours. I can fly to Venezuela or Colombia, up in the La Guajira and the peninsula, where the level of poverty is as bad as anywhere in Africa. I mean, it's arid, it's dry, you can't grow crops. People have maybe 1 or 2 pigs or goats, and so the poverty is extreme, and yet we tend to ignore it. We think only about the African continent as regions of extreme poverty, but it's far more nuanced than that.
Yeah, thank you. So may I so let's move to my last question. Is about how to draw and retain people's attention to global health issues. Just after the publication, Japanese edition of the Preventing the Next Pandemic sold well and was displayed at the main corner of the major bookstores in Japan.
However, well, you have to take a picture for me because I would love to see that.
Yeah, this one.
Oh, fantastic!
This one is the original.
No, but I want to see it in the bookstore because.
Okay, I had better to take a picture. Displayed as the main corner of the major bookstores in Japan. However, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the decrease in the spread of COVID-19, social attention has clearly, been diverted to other issues. And what you argue in this book is not a temporary issue, but a kind of lasting challenges that we human beings are facing in the so-called Anthropocene as a new geological epoch. The emergence of monkeypox can be understood as part of as an aspect of such lasting issues. I want people to understand that the global health issues are not just temporary, but long-run issues. And I'm just wondering how to attract and retain people's attention toward the global health issues. So do you have any tips?
Well, I think the way to think of it is, look at this pandemic. I mean, the public health part was maybe the smallest piece because it was the impact on it caused an global economic collapse, a global education collapse. It caused a global security collapse. So I think we have to realize that disease goes way beyond the health sector, and that it affects multiple sectors. And that's not only going to be true of COVID, it'll be true of monkeypox, it'll be true of polio. And so we need to think of disease very much like we think of security or defense threats. because they're of the same stature and category. And yet, countries think nothing of spending billions of dollars for military defense, but they would never consider spending billions of dollars for health defense. And yet the truth is health defense turns out as a far greater threat, right? And than that. So adjusting people's thinking, particularly among the leaders of the G20. I think, the Japanese governments are working very hard to support global health, but, the other G20 countries, China, Russia, Indonesia, they need to do more. And I think, this is, while it's important to do this at a G7 summit, and I know that's coming up in Japan, also at a G20 summit, this is going to be critically important as well.
Yeah, I think that people's attention is necessary to deal with global health challenges, especially in democratic countries such as Japan or United States. Without people's attention or support, no policy change can be expected. So I hope more people have their interest in global health issues, understand these global health issues in terms of global health security, and also it's linked to other issues such as climate change, war, or sustainable development. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, Professor Hotez and Professor Takuma, for sharing your superb views. We are grateful for your outstanding insight about vaccine development for the infectious diseases, including NTDs, especially in the African continent, vaccine diplomacy within the Ukraine crisis and COVID-19, and your thoughts on how to realize global health in a post-COVID-19 world. Now, may we receive some final comments from both of you?
Okay, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. As we discussed the problem that Dr. Hotez articulated in the book are not temporary, but lasting challenges, and issues are interrelated with each other. War in Ukraine is not only a political crisis, but a health crisis because the war destroyed health facilities and led to the spread of various infectious diseases. I want people to understand the complexity of the issues mentioned in the book and think about what they can individually do to deal with our challenges and for better health. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your insights and your brilliance, Professor Takuma. I really enjoyed very much your comments. I say, since the book has come out, unfortunately, things have gotten worse, not better. Now, because of the crisis in Ukraine, we're looking at a malnutrition and a hunger catastrophe because of the absence of grain and together with climate change in East Africa. And infectious diseases will exacerbate that. The anti-science aggression has gotten worse. Climate change has gotten worse. So we still have not hit the bottom yet. And so this is a time when we have to recognize that disease threats will continue. And the fact that now we have monkeypox and polio and on top of COVID, as well as Marburg virus, this is not by accident. This is a trend because of the social and physical determinants that are happening. So it's very important. I think we continue our dialogue, Professor Takuma, and I look forward to having future opportunities to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you.
This was a thrilling lecture, and I hope everybody gained greatly from hearing this. At SPJ, we will continue working on activities to promote the Sustainable Development Goals, including development efforts in low to middle income countries, especially in the African continent, and advocacies for global health and NTDs. For further information regarding our work and upcoming events, please check our website. Thank you very much again to Professor Hotez and Professor Takuma. And thank you to everybody joining us today. This concludes our session for the day. Thank you.